This eHIV review program is presented by DKB Med Radio.
Hi, everybody. My name is Justin Alves, and I am an HIV and addiction nurse working in Boston, and I am one of the program directors for eHIV Review with DKB Med. And I am really happy to be here today with a colleague, Kim Skeete from Southern California. We'll talk a little bit more with Kim in a bit about stigma. And so this is a companion piece to our recent eHIV Review webcast with Dallas Ducar, who is also a colleague of mine. And actually, it was at a conference with Dallas that I met Kim. So really excited to sort of be here with Kim today to talk about stigma for LGBTQ folks, particularly those sort of seeking care for HIV. Kimberly, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do at Bios Medical?
Yeah, so here at Bios Medical, where I'm actually currently at, I do clinical research. I'm a clinical research assistant. I also do our HIV testing and counseling, and I'm also the community liaison.
So you really are like a jack of all trades there. You're doing a little bit of everything and getting your hands dirty with everything.
Yeah, I'm actually also preparing to go to nursing school. So just putting my hands on everything or putting my hands in everything is great because I'm getting a lot of on the job training, which is preparing me.
Just made my heart so happy that you're going to be a nurse. And I think one of the really powerful things that we have when we are nurses or becoming nurses is sort of the stories that we carry with us from who we are and the experiences we've had. And I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit about your experience with stigma, maybe even in your job or when you were a patient and what that felt like for you.
Yeah, of course. So before I actually got into healthcare, I was a barber. I worked in a completely different industry. And by doing that, I was good. I had a passion for it. It was really great. But I felt happy but never whole. And then I kind of just fell into healthcare. I like to say, I didn't choose healthcare, it chose me. And being a trans woman of color, it's one of the things where I feel like I love being able to just open different doors for not only myself, but the generation after me. So that actually has led me to why I want to further my career in healthcare and become a nurse. And I actually got into healthcare by something that had happened to me when I was diagnosed HIV positive. And then when I got diagnosed, I knew nothing about HIV prevention, nothing. I never even imagined I would be working in healthcare. And it wasn't until I met my provider, the clinician who was assigned to me as provider, who's now my best friend, that I even knew I would be great in healthcare. I knew I cared about people and I wanted to take care of people, but I didn't know what capacity. And like I said, I didn't go looking for healthcare. Healthcare saw me, picked me, and here I am. So yeah.
And so I sort of am picking up on one of the things that you said there, where when you were diagnosed, you had never really heard of HIV prevention or things like that. What do you think kept you from hearing that messaging in the barbershop? What was the barrier for you, do you think?
I don't even think it was just the barbershop, Justin. I think it was just my life in general. I grew up in a Trinidadian background, and it wasn't talked about. Although sex was talked about, it was only talked about from a misogynistic standpoint, where women were just objectified. And me growing up queer, LGBTQ, before I even knew what that was, I just kind of got shunned out of those conversations. So talks about sex or taking care of yourself, prevention were not happening. It was definitely stigmatizing for myself. If I were to deviate away from the norm, I would be ostracized by my family, which I was. And so I just didn't know. I didn't know the first time I even was sexual with someone, I didn't even know how it was going to happen. Thank God for shows like Queer as Folk and Degrassi, because if I didn't have those, I would have been completely blindsided. I'd have been like, oh, that a penis? That's how far off it was because these things weren't talked about where I came from. So when I did start, exploring sexually, I was doing it completely ignorant. I knew nothing. I didn't even know full vulnerability. I didn't even know how to put on a condom because these are not things that were talked about. And at the time I was in school, that was when they were actually taking those lectures out of school. So
Yeah.
wasn't talked about there either.
Well, and so how do you think? So you're sort of talking about like the stigma in your culture and within your family that you faced sort of growing up queer, right?
hmm
How do you think that translated to your relationships in the healthcare setting?
I definitely wanted to be better, especially for people of color, especially for people of trans experience. I wanted the conversations to be normalized. I want the conversations to be centered on those marginalized groups and those communities, because that is a lot of those communities, like especially trans women of color, they're not having these talks and they're not wanting to go into these spaces because they feel like they're going to be judged. I too was judged. Even when I started my healthcare career, I'm judged now. As far as I've come, I can go some places and I'll still be judged just because I'm a trans woman of color. And that's what I kind of want to help us deviate away from. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but not all trans women of color are into sex work. We're all not, just out there being promiscuous. And I like to do the job that I'm doing because I get to go in these spaces as myself and deliver the message. I am fortunate to work with great clinicians and providers that, yes, they have their MDs or whatever, but I'm like the messenger. Through me, I can be that lifeline to the people who look like me and sound like me. And I'm just humbled to be able to do that because when it's coming from someone of your own experience, the message is not just heard, it's seen. And that's very important.
And so take me through as a young person sort of seeking healthcare, what brought you to like a clinic? What was it that drove you to actually come and seek healthcare? I think oftentimes my patients living with HIV, like they don't really want to see me, right? They're like, I'm good. Why do I have to see you so frequently? What is it that you think brought you to care originally? And then what keeps you coming back?
So from a patient standpoint, I went to care because it was just something I was told to do. It was a routine. I never really had a reason. It was just like go to healthcare. And then as I started getting into like college or late high school, I did cheer and dance. So a lot of those I had to do like annual physicals or do stuff like that. And that I want to say it was my junior year, probably my senior year, where I started hearing like, oh, if you're LGBTQ, you need to get tested and do this stuff. And although I hadn't had sex at that point, I was just like, okay, I'll get tested. So I routinely did get tested. Um, and I knew it was, getting tested for HIV, but everything else was just kind of not talked about. I grew up in Rancho Cucamonga, so it was a little bit more conservative back then. So there wasn't a lot of like STIs even going around. So I was so oblivious that my head was somewhere else. Um, so then when I started seeing some of the girls that I was cheering with test positive or reactive for STIs, that's when I was like, oh, okay, so this is not just something that affects LGBTQ people. Maybe I should take this more seriously. And I did. I started, continuing my routine testing, but I started trying to educate myself, although I never talked to my doctor. I never asked questions. I felt like if I asked questions, I was going to be judged or they were going to tell my parents or it was going to get to my family. So I just was just oblivious still, to be honest with you. And then I started exploring, men, man on man sex, because at the time I was still presenting very much male. So I started exploring that route, and there were different things that were happening sexually. So I was like, okay, this is different. And then I had a situation that happened to me when I did start, I guess you could say, cross-dressing. I ended up getting gang raped. And out of fear of being judged or being accused myself. I just had a feeling that the cops were going to blame me. They were going to be like, it's your fault. You did it. You tricked these guys. So I didn't say anything. And I was like, oh, so I didn't go to the hospital. I didn't know what PEP was. I had no idea. So I just kind of, I honestly acted like it didn't happen. I was just like, whatever. I can't tell my family. I can't tell my friends because they're going to tell my family, whatever. So that's what I did. And then I got sick. And then I was like, okay. And then I got very sick and it wasn't going away. So I was like, whatever, let me just go and get checked, let's see what's going on. I never thought in a million years that it was because I was serial converting. I never would have thought that. And then I got a call probably maybe a week later. It was a different time back then, so there wasn't a sense of urgency. And they were just like, hey, come in. So I came in, and that's when I found out I was diagnosed HIV positive.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for sharing that. I think that that's a horrible experience to have gone through. And I wonder, what do you think could have been different about the healthcare system, about providers you'd seen in the past that would have made it safer for you to come in? Like, because I think the stigma, right? Like the feeling that you couldn't go in, that isolation, the loneliness that sort of goes with that, is obviously powerful and has really powerful health effects. How do we change that?
I think now the times are a little bit different, so it's a little bit more progressive, but in a sense, it's not. I still feel that people of color get judged. It's like, and I've had experiences too, even now that I have all the knowledge I have and training, I still feel like people of color get judged. Like we're taught to be shamed. And like if I'm sick, I need to figure it out. Because if I go to a doctor, I'm not going to get the same care as my white or Asian counterparts. I'm going to get care as if I'm an inconvenience, or at least that's how it feels. Especially to me, it feels like I'm inconveniencing them. We, you know, and it sucks. It's really, it sucks. And I'm glad we're having conversations about this because I don't even think, I know providers and clinicians can do a better job by making it more of a human experience. Don't judge. And I say that to say this in healthcare, I do feel that, especially women of color, they get subpar experiences. Like they don't get providers that are going to go that extra mile. They're going to take that extra step. I can't explain why, but it's the truth. So a lot of people, especially Black women and Black men, don't want to go in. They're like, I'm going to get some tests and I'll rub some Vicks on my chest. I'll be fine, because they'd rather that than have to go through the whole mentalness of it all just to get care, get treated. They don't want to, mess up their psyche, rightfully so. It's myself. I will never forget. I went in for top surgery. This is a few years ago. And the surgeon, a surgeon, was like, oh, you're going to make a lot more money now. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, yeah, you're going to make a lot more money because you're going to have like double D's. And I was just like, and what do you mean? He was like, well, you're an escort, right? And I was just bewildered. I was like, what would make you think that? He was like, oh, it's okay. I support the girls. And at the time, I didn't say anything. I didn't even bat an eye. I was just like, okay. Because this is the guy that essentially is going to be cutting me open when I'm asleep. So I felt like I couldn't say anything. I couldn't even tell anyone. I just kept it in because I was like, if I complain or if I say that was inappropriate, one, I'm not going to get my surgery, which at the time was very crucial for my mental health. Two, he's going to kill me and I'll never know. I'll never be able to explain myself. It's going to be like, she just didn't wake up. Not saying he would, but this is what was running through my head. Or three, he would refuse service for me. So I just didn't say anything. And the entire time, even when I woke up from anesthesia, he was like, oh, yeah, I can't wait. Or he was like, you can't wait till you get back to work, huh? And I was just like, because I never corrected him. I never told him that he was wrong. And he was way wrong. I've never had to do sex work in my life. Not that there's anything wrong with that. That has just never been my story. And again, this is not that long ago. And this is a surgeon who's well known. So.
Well, and I think what you're describing too, right? I mean, it's not right. It's not okay, to quote a famous diva. But like, I think really understanding that, like, that's where all of us as a healthcare team need to step in. And I think nurses, doctors, the medical assistant, whoever is there, needs to step in and say something, right? The stigma that folks face is sort of all our responsibility. And I want to hone in on something that you said, because I think this is, for me, one of the most powerful things that you said is that it's the human experience. And that when we try to silo these things as like a queer stigma or a people of color issue or somebody living with HIV, we miss the fact that oftentimes people are all of these things, some of one, some of the other. So, how do you think what I talk about is like compounded stigma, right? Against queer folks, against people of color, against people living with HIV. How has that really affected your ability to seek good health care in the end?
I feel that for me, I am fortunate right now to have the provider I do, but there have been times that I was actually supposed to see others and I'm scared. I'm just like, I don't want to. I'm like, such and such, can't you just do it? And he's like, no, you'll be okay. And that's sad because I I work where I work, and yet I'm still scared myself. I think, like you mentioned, all of those things compacted. Stigma is just stigma, and I do think that although people have their degrees or their license to work, not everyone should be doing those jobs. I always say, you probably heard me say this at ANAC. I strive to put the care back in healthcare because I feel like that is the component that was taken out. I don't know why or how, but I feel like that was a component that was taken out. I remember at the first organization I worked at, one of my jobs was telling people when they had, when they tested positive. And I remember they were like, okay, so when you do that, you have 30 minutes to pretty much be like, you're positive. Let them take it in, and then you have to go to the next step. And I was like, nope, not doing that, because when I found out I was diagnosed, it was a resident and three other residents that all came in and told me. And I was just like, so is this like a group meeting? What's happening? Like, I don't even know what to say. There's like five people judging me. So I was like, And I always remember that and realized, okay, so now that I am in this space doing this work, this is what we need to do. I'm going to give them their diagnosis. I'm going to see how they take it in. We're going to breathe. And then I'm going to start the conversation and let them know that these are the next steps that they need to take. And if that takes an hour, it takes an hour. If it takes the rest of my shift, it takes the rest of my shift. And that's that. And if you cannot give me that, I won't do it. And they were like, okay.
Well, and Kimberly, I think one of the really important and wonderful things that you're like doing the work. So thank you for doing the work, but also is the power that one person really has to make a difference, right? Like you talked about your clinician who you met and who really changed a lot of the trajectory that you had in healthcare and your experience in healthcare. And now it sounds like you're sort of being that same clinician for other folks, right? Like sort of paying it forward. And what's the message that you have, sort of wrapping us up here today, um, for those clinicians who want to be that individual, who want to be that safe space within a system that's not perfect, right? That is really not just not perfect, but oftentimes a source of trauma for folks. What's your words of wisdom for us?
You're going to make me emotional. Okay. So the one thing that my now best friend and clinician did to me, I'll never forget. I was told that I couldn't be positive and start medically transitioning at the same time. So and that's what I thought. I was even told, hey, I get it, you want to transition, but we need to start you on antivirals. How about you just walk more? And I'm like, okay, I guess that's gonna make me forget about my transition. It didn't, by the way. So I was just always told that I couldn't do both. And then someone was like, hey, there's this clinician who's starting in Palm Springs. You should go see him. I never been to Palm Springs before that because, like I said, I'm from Rancho Cucamonga. It's like 2 hours away. And I came out here. I met this clinician, and the one thing he told me that changed my life was Your healthcare journey is going to be a journey. I am going to be the co-pilot. You are going to be the pilot. You are in charge of your healthcare journey. I'm just there to assist you and make sure you have the things you need. So what do you want? And when he asked me that, I was just like, what do you want? Like, he was like, no, this is about you. And like I mentioned earlier, patient-centered care. This was about me. So much so that when me and this clinician actually got to work together and build the first ever gender affirming care team in the desert, Whoop Whoop did that, we made sure that we wanted a program for the people, by the people, me, and we wanted to make sure that every patient that walked into those doors knew that they were the pilot, the clinicians were the co-pilot. And it changed my life. More so, it got me not just to exist in life as I had been doing, but it was for the first time I felt like I was able to live life because I was feeling seen, I was feeling heard. Up to that point, no one had ever even cared. It was just like, this is what you're here for, boo, here's some meds. He was just like, what do you want? And although he was not able to start me on estrogen right away because of fatty tissues and all that stuff that I'm sure you know, he did start me on blockers because they had no adverse effects. And just him doing that was like, boom. Okay, so those ideologies of I need to die, I don't need to be here no more just went away. And it wasn't that he was giving me the meds I requested. It was just that he cared enough to be like, let's just start this. And in my mind, it was like, he cares. He cares. He tried to, do a different route. The journey's not always going to look as we want it to look, but as long as we know we're not doing the journey alone, that's all that matters. And it changed my life. It's changed my life. I can speak so much about it. I'm
Well,
so grateful for that clinician. And yeah,
Kimberly, I am so grateful for you and like being here and sharing your journey with us. And I think we have a lot more to see from you. I suspect you will be a colleague of mine for many years to come. And I do want to thank you for your time tonight, sort of talking with me about all of these things. I think you've really shed a lot of light on how damaging stigma can be, but also how truly a patient-centered, caring clinician can sort of maybe be a panacea for a lot of that stuff. So thank you so much for your time today. And thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you for having me.